guess we're doing a continuation, part 3 of what we got? China, global warming, and the coronavirus. How people may have used science to betray humanity. The last thing we're talking about was India. India has something called hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine, something like that. But basically, it's used to treat COVID-19, and people. It sounds like it's actually been very effective in some cases. Of course, they haven't been through all the trials, in particular with COVID-19 itself, but it has been used to treat other things, and it's proven to be at least safe in the doses that they currently put in. That said, India is currently, I guess, the main producer of this particular drug. And when we, in America, came to them and tried to get supplies to help everybody, well, I think more than one country actually did, and they just cut everybody off. So, in one sense, it sounds understandable, but in another sense, it's like, why? You know, it makes sense if you're trying to make sure you got things for your, you got supplies for your country. But if we're really a global family, then why just cut everybody off? But later on, I think after India kind of looked at it, they basically lifted it partially just to make sure they had enough for themselves and enough, and try to supply some to the rest of the world. So that was cool. So we really appreciate that. It does bring a question about, it does expose like a weakness of globalization. If we're willing to source out different functions or services or products, and situations like this happen, is it really beneficial to just source everything out? You would think you'd almost need to maintain your own supply or production means, since you can't necessarily trust another nation, I guess it appears. But at the same time, how can you really plan for everything? You can't just plan for everything. And so you can only just make the best of what you got. Unless, of course, this is a conspiracy, worldwide conspiracy. Let's see. I also heard news about China covering up things. I've heard of people inside of China basically getting censored about what they report out. Now, going back to the conspiracy about global warming, and then this, this epidemic starting there in China, that's pretty shady. Especially for a country that's supposed to be a leader in actually trying to save the world through the use of, technology and cutting global warming for the planet. If that is your true intention, why would you keep secrets, or why would you try to silence the people inside your country who are trying to warn people outside the country about a potential epidemic? That is very, very, very two-faced, and I'm not sure if China is seeing that. But if it's intentional, if this whole thing, epidemic is intentional, it makes sense. Why would you warn the rest of the world about population control? If you want to destroy the world, you want to give your germ warfare as much time as possible to actually take effect, if that's the case. But it's real shady. I also question how fast it spread, which I think is really, really weird, especially how it got into certain locations. I question how it got into seemingly Hollywood. Also, how the British, I think, Prime Minister has it. It's like, how is it getting so, how is it spreading so effectively? And then on top of that, my understanding is that the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually did an exercise, and this is really bad, if it's true. They did an exercise to see how an epidemic would react, or what would happen during an epidemic. And then this thing happens. On top of that, the scenario, from what I understand, actually played out the same way. And it doesn't seem like the World Health Organization actually learned anything from it. They learned what it might do, but didn't actually do anything to stop it as effectively as possible. Then on top of that, when the president of our country decided to close off the borders, travel between us and China, this was before the World Health Organization said, yeah, this is bad. So that's weird. That's really, really weird, considering there should be some of the smartest people in the world. Not to mention, you already did an exercise for this an epidemic in the World Health Organization, and then we still run into this big of an issue. And then the President of the United States actually sees it as an issue before the World Health Organization. That's shady sounding too. But I would like to say, really appreciate the people of China, the doctors that actually decided to try to get the word out. I believe that's Dr. Afin and Dr. Li Wenliang. And they showed hope, a lot of courage as far as trying to get the information out, despite trying to be silenced by the Chinese government. Okay, these doctors are basically more world conscious than the Chinese government, who's supposed to be world conscious by introducing all this stuff about global warming being a global leader, having a leader in technology for electronic cars. That don't make sense. That don't make any sense at all to me at this point. But we definitely appreciate the Chinese people. We hope the government is actually doing better, but it still sounds like there may be evidence of foul play going on now. That outbreaks are continuing, even though China is trying to make it look like things are good. But we don't even know if they really are good. I mean, if China is really keeping open communication with the WHO and all the other countries to try to help everybody, that would be really good information. But if you're trying to further spread it by giving false hope to people, population control, because you want to save the planet, you know what I'm saying? Well, by the way, I think that's one of the most immoral things about science, is that science, I don't even know if science really has any morals. I mean, can you ever really justify killing people with science? Can you justify genocide with science? Can you justify testing germs or chemical warfare on people because it's science, in the name of science? That's a scary thing about science. You can be scared about religion all over the planet, but science is one of the most unhinged things that man has ever conceived. And it's a good thing, don't get me wrong. I believe God is the greatest scientist, and scientists are just figuring out what he already did. But that's another story in itself. But population control. My issue with population control is that the Chinese government has already done things in the past to its own people to try to control the population. So if the Chinese government has already done it to the Chinese people, I don't see it as a very far stretch to basically do population control if you believe global warming is true. Now, I don't know if they actually believe global warming is true, or if it's actually something used to actually just flip the economy of the world, so you're no longer dependent on oil nations that use oil, and now you have to depend on China, or which I believe is basically the biggest producer of electric cars. You just swamp the whole economic tree, or however you want to call it, or a pyramid. Which, all right, cool. If that's what it's supposed to be, may it be. If it is. But if you're playing games, that's not cool. And not only that, if you are, either you're really good, you change your ways, and you don't think population control was cool. You apologize to Chinese people, and but if you don't, why should we believe that? Why wouldn't we put it past the Chinese government to actually kill people intentionally with a coronavirus? Does it have to be man-made? No. That makes absolutely no sense. If you're going to make a virus, if you're going to tie it to global warming, it has to be naturally occurring. So you can find one. And as long as you find it, and then just figure out how to get it to go and get it naturally to transfer to man, hey, you got climate control. You just prove global warming is a thing, and that it produces viruses and stuff like that, which is going to kill mankind. And then on top of that, you decrease the population. You already stopped people from working. You stopped the industrial machine. So now you're not emitting as many chlorofluorocarbons in the air and carbon dioxide and all this other stuff. And so now everybody's supposed to look at it and say, wow, you know what? If we really reduce carbon output, then it will save the world. But how do you even test for that? You know what I'm saying? To me, you'd have to have sensors all over the planet to really measure if global warming is even a thing. Not to mention, you'd have to be able to test for years, or at least, really for years, to even figure out how much it changed, what it causes to change. If one reaction over here, going back to the law of for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. I mean, if it warms up over here, does it cool down over here? That doesn't mean that global warming is a thing. It just means that, all right, temperature is shifting. Just like the jet stream, it goes all the way around the planet. We have the tide of the moon. It brings up the water, and it helps the undersea current actually do. Cold water cycles through the oceans all around the earth, and that's part of the stuff that actually causes all the seasons and stuff like that. Solar flares, you name it. I mean, there are many factors that actually affect weather. You know, things that I don't think most people even consider, but we are just going to believe that global warming is a thing. I mean, yeah, if you fart, it's going to heat up the air a little bit, okay? Cause and effect. But the question is it actually a bad thing? In some cases, I've seen where it actually might be a good thing. If we're still technically in an ice age, global warming may actually be keeping us at a decent temperature, if it's true. Now, would you still consider global warming a bad thing if it's actually keeping us out of an ice age? I wouldn't. Okay. Me, I personally, I don't like being cold. I like it sometimes, a little bit of snow. Go around, spin around in the middle of a four-wheel drive truck a little bit. But when spring comes, hey, that's cool. Summer, ooh, awesome. Fall, hey, I like all four seasons. But, I mean, that's just something we really need to look at. I don't think we have enough evidence for it. And if the world's millions of years old, we definitely got to have more data than a couple thousand years to be measuring what the planetary seasons actually do. It could be a planetary season, okay, instead of just like the four seasons. Another thing I was thinking about is, what about the Sahara Desert? It looks like, I think there's been evidence at one point in time that the Sahara Desert may not have actually been a desert before. It could have been a jungle, but now it's a desert. If that's true, then that means there is beyond the four seasons, there is actually a global shift in seasons or temperatures and stuff like that. Stuff like that needs to be considered before we just drop the mic on this global warming thing. Let's see here. Another thing about that, we really need to do just a whole nother study. I would say do more than one location independently. Scientists from certain regions to actually do their own study, and that's not just looking at the weather reports from the Farmer's Almanac. I'm talking about tree rings, ice cores, any areas we can actually look up data and find out what weather and climate has done. Excuse me, as far back as possible. And then look at it as a grain of salt. With a grain of salt. Alright, now if this thing, let's just say, hypothetically, I came up with some goals I think China may have had for the coronavirus, if it's negligent. And I would think the coronavirus would be used as a way of proving that emissions will help the environment. Another would be to decrease the population in the name of global warming, because I think global warming, the only real logical, or there are solutions for it that I don't think we've necessarily considered, but I think anybody who is really serious about global warming will seriously think about population control, whether it be voluntarily or through some type of germ warfare. Because if you believe that other countries are trying to kill everybody, what's to stop you from doing something in the name of science, in the name of saving the world? It's like Thanos. Thanos believed that he needed to destroy half the population around the world. So is this a Thanos situation for China? I hope not, but interesting. I believe another goal is to prove that capitalism is endangering the environment to a degree. Also, I think it's really meant to kind of bankrupt America. In this situation right now, you can actually see how not only is it affecting our country and the countries around the world, but it's affecting small businesses. A lot of things are happening right now because of this coronavirus. And it's the perfect storm to actually make a country or countries actually, how do you say, make an economic downturn in their economy. Another issue I just thought about was oil. If I remember correctly, it seemed like there's been some oil prices have been dropping in the last, I'm not sure how long, but it seems like with the advent of this global warming thing, and people are trying to move toward away from gas, and then of course the Paris Agreement, and before we actually pulled out of it, or officially made notification that we're pulling out of it, I bet you that's probably one of the factors that was driving down oil. Okay, let's see here. And I would imagine, as a goal, if you can start pushing the economy down just with the knowledge of global warming and the push toward making it legally binding for countries to reduce their emissions, you're going to drive the economy down. But it's almost like a perfect solution to where if you really want to flip the world economy from a gasoline or oil-based economy to electric, and your country is the sole or the main producer or possibly the sole producer of electronic components for electric cars, that's the perfect way of doing it, is to drive it down. Put more oil into the system, drive the cost down, and just watch the world squirm, which is not cool, not cool at all. I'll talk about some of the people it hurts a little bit later, but also some things I think to look out for to prove my point or prove my theory is correct is one is news reports that the coronavirus is caused by global warming. I actually missed this situation. I thought about it first, but I ended up seeing that story already. So the story's already out. Another thing I was looking at is that China or somebody would actually try to make the U.S. as a source of the virus. That's already happened as well. Now, if the Chinese government, I should say, is being very devious in this situation, I compared it to a movie. I saw a movie one time, and the movie was probably one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen. Well, it's not a horror movie. It's I'd say more of a science fiction thriller. And even though the movie was really like a B version movie, I don't think the acting was real good, and some of the action I don't think was really good. But the concept behind the story was just intriguing to me. I mean, it was like, dang, that's deep. Because I never would have, I don't think I would have considered it until I saw this movie. But I saw this movie way a long time ago, back in the 80s. But to show you how big of an impression it made on me, it's called, the movie is called I Come in Peace. And the premise behind the movie is that there was an alien, actually two aliens. One was a bad guy, one was a good guy. The good guy was, of course, chasing the bad guy. But the bad guy came to Earth to harvest spinal fluid from humans or something like that. And so what he would do is he would go around, and he had this little box on his arm. And in the box had like a spike that came out. And he would come up to people and be like, I come in peace. And then he would stab them with it and suck all the juice out of their spinal cord or whatever, and move on to the next victim. But the montage is he played like he was the good guy. I come in peace. But he used that to disarm everybody so that he can actually kill them as quickly as possible. And that's the kind of the sense I get from China. That would be the sense they have. It's like they're playing the good guy with this global warming, and we're a global leader, and we have the technology to help, you know, decrease all the carbon emissions, all the CO2 and stuff like that. But in the end, they're just really trying to get power. I hope that's not the case. Either that, or it could be revenge, or, you know, hey, we're tired of being an oil-based economy. Let's flip it, change into a new world order, you know. But we shall see as time goes on. Another thing I'll bring up is I think the timing of the virus is really weird. The formal announcement by the U.S. was on the 4th of November 2019. The first report of the virus occurred on the 31st of December in 2019. And the WHO reported a mysterious pneumonia sickening dozens in China. It almost seems like this could have been a retaliation for the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Just saying. Bad timing. Interesting timing, though. I believe the virus was supposed to be released in the U.S., but maybe it got pushed ahead because of us getting out of the Paris Agreement. If it happened in the U.S., that would have been a serious blow against the U.S., I believe, especially because of the us pulling out of the Paris Agreement. It would also, of course, be global warming causes epidemic. Okay, but I think it backfired. I think it got released earlier than it was supposed to, or for whatever reason it didn't. It just stalled, or maybe somebody dropped it somewhere, trying to infect somebody in Wuhan. Let's see. All right. My questions for you, hypothetical questions, is who loses if we transition to electric vehicles? And how would outlawing gasoline and diesel engines affect you, your family, and your country? My response is I think oil-producing countries like the Middle East, the U.S., Russia, Venezuela, and others that I'm not too sure about, I don't have a full list. I think they would be the hardest hit, you know, and I believe that would be how the balance of power would be shifted. Because right now there's a lot of power being thrown around through the use of oil. Also, I think refineries that produce or turn the oil into gasoline and diesel for the world, all the jobs, all the supporting jobs, cities, restaurants, healthcare, etc. All those jobs that are required to support those oil-based manufacturing companies